Zelda. Talk about a genre-defining game series. I don't think there's anyone who at least hasn't heard of Zelda if they've played a video game in their life. Having over 20 games in the franchise and going 30 plus years strong, it's left its mark in the gaming world to say the least. Starting with the original all the way back in 1987, showing open world exploration in the 8-bit era, to the most recent entry of Breath of the Wild and taking that idea to the extreme. It's a series I fell into around the mid to late 2000s, but I was aware of the series through Super Smash Bros. On the N64. Yeah, believe it or not, I grew up with an N64 and never had Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask on this thing. I've at least picked up a copy of Ocarina of Time for collection's sake. It wasn't until the GameCube was out with the Legend of Zelda Collector's Edition that had Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and Zelda 1 and 2, as well as a cool 30-minute little demo of Wind Waker that I finally dived into the series. But I really got my start with the series with Minish Cap on the Game Boy Advance. However, the one game that made me into the Zelda fan I am today is Twilight Princess. I remember seeing images of this game around 2004 or 5, but never did catch that famous E3 reveal trailer. I actually didn't see the trailer until years later after the game came out, and looking back, I can see why it's considered to be one of the greatest E3 reveals of all time. I would search for websites with any information because it looked unlike anything I'd seen before. It was like, whoa, look how realistic this looks! It was actually through this I ended up getting into the Zelda community a bit. Some people might know that I enjoyed the Yakuza series a lot, but Zelda was much bigger for me back in the day. I got into Zelda community websites like Zelda Informer, Zelda Universe, so finally, when the year came that Twilight Princess was coming out, I begged my parents for Christmas that year and got The Legend of Spyro New Beginning instead. Real talk, this game isn't half bad. I'd like to do a video on this series at one point in the future, but that's for another time. A few months later, I finally got it for the GameCube and played it non-stop. I had bought the strategy guide weeks before I got the game, and I read it front to back several times. I don't have it anymore, unfortunately, but I memorized it as much as I could. After I finished it, though, I don't remember much. I would replay it many times growing up and never got tired of it. I think it was at one point when my friends asked me what my favorite game was, and I said Twilight Princess without really thinking about it, and it just stuck because it felt right. But around 2014, I played through Persona 4 Golden for the first time, and after finishing it, I felt my opinion changed. It was a very weird feeling. The game I said that was my favorite of all time for years had been overtaken by something else. This happened again in 2017 when Breath of the Wild released and now shares that same spot as Persona 4 Golden as my favorite game of all time. If asked why these two are my favorite, I feel I could answer it and explain what both games do that I enjoy a lot. I never did this with Twilight Princess though. That's mainly why I wanted to look at Twilight Princess here today. It may sound like an easy question to answer, like why is something your favorite of all time? But I feel like there's a lot to really dig into with this question, so today, we're going to be tackling that. I'll be looking at the HD version on Wii U since it has updated visuals as well as extra content. Even then, I feel you could play this on the original hardware. The only big differences back then is that the Wii version had widescreen support when the GameCube didn't, so if you're really into that sort of thing, just know that going in. I'll also be going over the plot, but this time in a little bit more detail than I usually do, which will make more sense later on. So with all that out of the way, let's go into personal adventures to see why this game was my favorite of all time. In the Ordana region at the Twilight Hour, a conversation is taking place about the regrets of spirits who have departed the world of the living with Russell, a swordsman from the village of Ordon. We're introduced to this game's Link, who has lived in the village as a ranch hand for a few years and has made friends with most of its residents. He asks Link if he would do the village a favor and represent Ordon with a gift to the royal family in a few days. Link agrees and the two head back to the village. While preparing for the journey, we're introduced to the children of the village as well as Ilya, the mayor's daughter. The kids all have their quirks, like with Colin seeing Link almost as an older brother and wanting to be like him since he's pretty shy and timid, and Ilya as someone who may or may not have romantic feelings for Link. I think this is the first Zelda game where there's more romantic subtext between Link and a character where they're already in a relationship, but it's never fully confirmed. You'll go around Ordon Village and do some odd jobs to help out the residents that help establish the setting and some more of the game's mechanics. I really like this opening. It gets you connected with these characters and helps create Link as his own person while also establishing him as a link between the player and the game. On the day Link is set to head out, Ilya is about to see him off, but suddenly they're ambushed by King Bulbin, who knocks out Link and injures Ilya. Later, after waking up, Link chases after the orc and comes across a wall of shadow before being forcefully dragged into it, where on the other side he turns into a wolf and passes out again, before being dragged away by a shadow monster with another creature watching from afar. After waking up in a dungeon, a mysterious imp named Midna helps Link escape. As they make their way through the remnants of Hyrule Castle, they come across this game's Zelda, who explains that she surrendered to keep the people of Hyrule safe from the evil King Zant, who has invaded the Light World from the Twilight Realm. Link and Midna escape the castle, with Link agreeing to obey Midna if it means that he can save his friends. After saving the Light Spirit Ordana and clearing the Forest of Twilight, Link regains his human form and is greeted by the Light Spirit Farron, who tells him that he is the descendant of the legendary hero and to go to the first temple where a sealed power awaits that he'll need to take on the darkness that has begun to plague Hyrule. It's from here you'll follow the typical Zelda formula. Go through dungeons, obtain an item, use that item against the dungeon boss, and collect a MacGuffin called the Fused Shadow. In the first half of the game, between each dungeon you'll explore a new area of Hyrule and rid the area of Twilight as a wolf by killing bugs that drop tears of light. Afterwards, you'll get some exposition from the Guardians of those regions about their duty and guide Link to his next objective. Everything that happens between the first 3 dungeons helps establish not only the characters but also the world around you. They contain these little mini arcs that continue to build on the overall plot. For example, when you first meet Colin, he's very shy and timid, but after restoring light in the Elden region, he steps in to protect Beth, another kid from Ordon, from an oncoming raid of Bulbins because he wanted to be like Link and be a hero. After rescuing him, he finds newfound courage, and the other kids take that as inspiration and start helping out in Kakariko. It's little details like this that make me really appreciate this first half, because it really does feel like what you're doing is having an effect on the world around you, and leading you to inspire the people around Link. Other Zelda games had this idea too at points, especially Majora's Mask, but Twilight Princess was the first game I played in the series where I really saw it in full swing. One of my favorite moments is after escorting Prince Rallis of the Zoras and seeing everyone back together after all the events that separated them from Ordon. It's a wholesome moment and it just feels really nice. We also get some nice lore drop for the series, and one of the creepiest cutscenes in Zelda thanks to the Light Spirit Lanayru, who tells Link about the Twilight and their attempt to take over the Sacred Realm before being banished by the Light Spirits. It also warns them that when seeking forbidden power like the Fused Shadow, that it's also possible to be corrupted by it. Which doesn't really make any sense because at no point during the story does Link react to this except for the cutscene, which is a bit odd because imagine if we got to see Link corrupted by power or greed. Unfortunately, it can't really happen in this game because at that point what Link is supposed to be would be broken. A cool concept, but maybe for a later time. After collecting the 3 pieces of the Fused Shadow, Zant decides to finally take things into his own hands. He appears before Link and Midna in honestly a pretty awesome moment where he then knocks out Link, turns him back into a wolf, and subdues Midna with little effort. Just before he can finish them off, Lanayru teleports them away to safety. Battered and beaten, the Light Spirit tells the two to make their way to Zelda to help break the curse on Link and save Midna, who's now on the verge of dying. After sneaking back into the castle, Zelda tells Link he'll need to obtain the Blade of Evil's Bane to break the curse on him since, like her, he has been blessed with a piece of the Triforce. Midna, with her last bit of strength, begs Zelda to help Link find the Mirror of Twilight. Zelda takes pity on her and decides to give Midna her life essence to save her. Midna protests, but it's too late as Zelda fades away into nothingness. With a new sense of resolve, the two continue their journey to stop Zant and free Hyrule from the Twilight invasion. Making their way to the hidden shrine in Foron Woods, Link is able to draw the Master Sword and breaks his curse. Midna tells Link that there may still be a way to get to Zant, but they need to find the Mirror of Twilight. They travel to Gerudo Desert, and before going forward, Midna reveals that she is the descendant of the Twyla that tried to invade Hyrule at one point, and that the goddesses were the ones that left the Mirror of Twilight as a link between the worlds. I actually really like this moment for Midna, as throughout most of the game up to this point she's been really snarky and shown little remorse about what's going on in the Light World, and now we're getting to see a change in her. It's little, but I really like redemption stuff like this. At the top of Arbiter's grounds, they find the mirror that has been broken into 4 separate pieces. It's then that the sages appear and inform them that since Zant isn't the rightful king of the Twilight Realm, that the mirror couldn't be fully broken, and that if they collect the shattered pieces, they may be able to restore it. They also mention a man named Ganondorf who was banished to the Twilight Realm for his crimes, but did not foresee Zant gaining power from Ganondorf's influence thanks to his Triforce of Power. It's because of this that Zant's power grew as much as it did and was able to overtake the Light World. With a new path ahead of them, Link and Midna set off to find the shards of the mirror. From here, it's another set of dungeons and bosses while continuing the plot. There isn't really a lot that happens during this point in the story though. You'll get some help from the Resistance, a group that is trying to save Hyrule, but the game doesn't show them doing much besides giving information outside of probably Shad, and even then it's only to help you move a statue. The only big thing of convenience that happens through a lot of this is when Ilia, who lost her memories earlier after being kidnapped, gains them back and helps tie up that little plot thread. There's some good moments scattered throughout, but that's all they are, which is a little disappointing because I thought the first half did a solid job of giving you a story that was pretty easy to follow but didn't drag its feet either. You were given a conflict and you resolved it. I get it's a very tight rope when writing a story, but I feel that if the Resistance were given time to be fleshed out just a bit, it would help carry the second half of the game. These characters look cool and I want to get to know them, but I'm not sure if it was due to cutting things out of the final game, but I feel like there was a plan to implement them more into the story. Once Link and Midna obtain the final mirror piece, they return to Arbiter's grounds and restore the mirror, granting them access to the Palace of Twilight. It's here when the sages reveal that Midna is actually the Twilight Princess and the rightful ruler of the Twilight Realm. Midna reflects on their journey and realizes that in order to save the Twilight Realm, they must also save the Light World, and hardens her resolve to defeat Zant. Traveling through the Twilight Realm, Link and Midna make their way to the throne room and confront Zant once again. He explains that after he was rejected as the next king of the Twilight Realm, he went mad and allowed himself to become a vessel for Ganondorf to overthrow Midna. After beating Zant, who's on the verge of death, he reveals that the curse that was placed on Midna due to his magic won't vanish without defeating Ganondorf, who's already been revived in the Light World, before being killed by her. Returning to the Light World, Link and Midna storm Hyrule Castle and find Ganondorf in the throne room with an unconscious Zelda above him. Similar to the final battle in Ocarina of Time, a final confrontation ensues with 4 back-to-back boss fights with Zelda regaining consciousness later on to help out as well, ending with a one-on-one duel between Link and Ganondorf, who's apparently so fascinated with fishing rods that it allows Link to land the final blow. With Ganondorf defeated, Midna regains her true form and peace returns to the Light World. The kids return to Ordon Village and are reunited with their families. Link and Zelda accompany Midna as she leaves the Light World, but before leaving, she destroys the mirror so it can't be used for evil again. After saying their farewells, Link returns briefly to Ordon before setting off on another adventure. And that about sums up Twilight Princess. Not as in depth as some of the other games I've covered with its plot, but it's a nice easy story to follow nonetheless. The only time it drops the ball a bit is in the second half. It sucks too because it seems like there was more that could be told with some of the locations that you get to go to and the Resistance. It's like they made the set pieces but didn't write anything about them. One of my favorite things in games, not just in Zelda but in open world games in general, is having an easy enough story to follow but also environmental storytelling. Sometimes the way to say more is less, and let the player see either the aftermath or the beginning of something with no dialogue. Some of my favorite examples of this are in Breath of the Wild and Ghost of Tsushima. You have your main goal set in front of you, but when traveling you'll see how the world has been affected because of what's happened in it. Twilight Princess has this at points too. Take the hidden shrine in Foreign Woods for example. It may look like a dilapidated building when you first come here because it's meant to be the moment when you get the Master Sword, but later on you come back to find one of the mirror shards in the past through a portal that takes you to the Temple of Time in pristine condition, and with the original song from Ocarina of Time as well. It's such a cool moment and adds so much more to the world. The one area I think that gets it the worst is Snow Peak Ruins. When sledding down Snow Peak, you will see it come in the view and it's like, whoa, what's that doing there? But the game never really expands on that I know of. I couldn't find any dialogue that added to it either. It looks like some kind of armory, but that's about all I could get out of it. If only there was a thing that existed that went more into the plot and really expanded upon these ideas. Oh wait, there is. Let me introduce you guys to the Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess manga. There was no way I couldn't include this in the video. I love this manga. I have been reading manga for over a decade at this point, but didn't start collecting until about a year ago. The Twilight Princess manga, drawn by the duo named Akira Himekawa, came out originally in 2017, nearly 10 years after the original game came out. Zelda had manga before this, and I do recommend some of these as they're a fun read, but Twilight Princess was the one that really expanded more on the story from the game it's based on. It helps that it's spread over multiple volumes and allows it to be fleshed out, but some of the ideas it inserts are just really cool and even helps tie in Ganondorf a bit better into the plot, since in the original game he does just kind of show up at the end. These aren't canon by any means, but because of that they're able to change a few things around, helping it flow better and tie more into Zelda's lore. I love Zelda lore. It's one of the main reasons I bought all 3 of these books, the Hyrule Historia, Arts and Artifacts, and Encyclopedia. These help explain how Zelda's timeline is connected and how some plot elements in later entries tie back into the earlier games. With the Twilight Princess manga specifically, it goes into deeper territories with the characters' relationships and expands even more on how the world around them is connected to Zelda's lore. I reread all 9 volumes that are currently out after finishing the game again, and it's held up extremely well. It fixes just about all my issues I had with the story. Characters like the Resistance are put to better use, and thanks to Link being his own character, he's able to bounce off the others more and really makes you feel for him when things go wrong. I understand that not everyone may be willing to give these a shot because at the end of the day, it's having to go to another source to get more fulfillment out of something that the original game didn't fully provide. But if you're willing to give it a shot, it delivers on the story and then some, and not only is it a good manga based off a game, but a good manga in general. Moving back to the game though, when it comes to Zelda, Twilight Princess is about as traditional as you can get. You got the standard items like boomerang, bow, hook shot, or in this game called the claw shot, and you even get 2 of them later on. Some new items are introduced as well, such as the Dominion Rod, which lets you take control of marked statues that can be manipulated to move them around and stuff. The Spinner, which looks cool, but isn't used much outside the dungeon you get it in. One of my favorites is the Ball and Chain. It weighs you down a lot, but not only can you use it as a shield, when hurling it towards an enemy, it packs a punch and it can hit an enemy twice if you aim it just right. This game really loves bombs for some reason. You got the regular kind, water bombs that can be used in water, and lastly the return of bomb shoes, which I only used one time just to see what it did because up until this playthrough, I've never seen the reason to use them. At no point are they required to use thanks to another upgrade introduced called the bomb arrows, where you attach a bomb to an arrow and shoot it at whatever you aim at. These are great for taking out enemies in the distance, and thanks to them doing a lot of damage, they usually kill a lot of things in one hit, but it drains both bombs and arrows at the same time, which really isn't an issue because you can get up to 3 bomb bags that can be fully upgraded to hold even more. I get that bombs have been a staple since the first game, but it's like, chill guys, I'm not looking to blow up Hyrule off the map. Besides bombs, the bow can be equipped with the Hawkeye. You have to go out of your way to get this by completing a side quest, and on its own it just lets you see things far away, but when combined with the arrow, it becomes a sniper rifle. This can be great for taking out enemies in dungeons or in specific parts of the overworld. Besides items, what's a Zelda game without sword combat? Besides borrowing most of the moveset from Wind Waker, Link feels the most versatile he's ever been thanks to the new hidden skills he can learn from the Hero Shade. When traveling through the overworld, if you find these Howling Stones, you can play a small rhythm game and summon the Shade to appear somewhere in Hyrule, and he'll teach you one of the 7 hidden skills in the game. What's really cool looking back is that some of Link's moveset from this game would transfer the Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild, and moves like the Fatal Blow and Shield Strike, which would turn into the Shield Bash later on, originated here. These hidden skills can help with some of the more armored enemies later in the game. It makes you feel like you're growing with Link through the adventure. One of my favorite things to do after combat is sheathing my sword. When the game was first shown off, you saw Link do this cool animation. Depending on the enemy you defeat, if you sheath your sword, Link will do this animation and it just feels so good pulling off. Outside of fighting as a Hylian, you'll also transform into a wolf at points. As a wolf, most of your attacks carry over from Link's normal form. Combat doesn't change too much except for this AoE attack that Midna can do, and it does a lot of damage to every enemy you hit with it. Wolf Link tends to shine the most during exploration and puzzle solving. The new sensibility allows you to see things that you normally couldn't, like spots you can dig up or hidden enemies. You can use Midna to reach certain places and later on teleport around Hyrule. As versatile as Link is in this game, it's one of the reasons why this Link is one of my favorites to play as. At the same time though, it does lead to one of Twilight Princess's biggest problems, and that is that the game is really easy. This is probably the easiest 3D Zelda game in the series. In HD, you have the option to make the game harder with Hero Mode once you beat the game, where no hearts spawn, and if you have the Ganondorf amiibo, you can make Link take double damage. I've never attempted to do this mode, but with as much as you have at your disposal, I'm not sure just how much harder this would make the game entirely. Personally, as many times as I've beaten this game, I've never had an issue with the difficulty. And Twilight Princess is the only Zelda game I've wanted to attempt to do something like a 3 heart run or a no shield run, which I have done once. I didn't do that for this playthrough mainly because this third-party controller was total ass before I switched to the gamepad, where I decided I just wanted a comfy ride from beginning to end, and that to me is one of the best things about the difficulty. It makes this Zelda one of the best to start with, and on top of that, the game is very well balanced thanks to its well-designed dungeons and bosses. Twilight Princess offers some of the best dungeons in the series. They have a certain flow to them that makes going through them fun and engaging. It also helps that they have set pieces to help keep track of where you've been and need to go next. I'd say probably the lowest point is the Palace of Twilight, cause there's a lot of waiting around on platforms, and the boss fight against Zant is just a repeat of mechanics from bosses you fought up to that point. Even the mini-bosses got some love thanks to their designs looking awesome and they feeling like an actual mini-boss. They have a small intro and unique fights that require paying attention to the environment around you. My favorite one is probably Death's Sword in Arbiter's Grounds. It fits with the rest of the dungeon's aesthetic, and I just really like his design. Dungeon bosses also got a really big glow up this time around. Like most Zelda bosses, they're built around a puzzle that requires figuring out and then wailing the damage on them. One of my favorite things that Twilight Princess added was this finish move you can do on the last hit to kill the boss. It looks awesome when you pull it off, and just seeing the boss go down afterwards, it's like, yeah, take that! It adds visual spectacle to them and helps them stand out even more. It's not just dungeons though that got this treatment, but the entire world as well. Outside the standard dungeons, Hyrule itself is quite big. Not as big as Breath of the Wild, of course, but there's still a lot to explore. One of the most common criticisms is that Hyrule is too big with not a lot to do. I've never really understood that, to be honest. If you're going through just the main story, then that is partially true, as just going from point A to point B won't have you exploring every nook and cranny for secrets. I typically don't go for 100% in Zelda games, except for the ones I really enjoy, and Twilight Princess fits that description. I bring this up because when taking a break from the main story or finding collectibles, there's a lot more to Hyrule than a person might see. In this game, there are not only the standard heart pieces to find, with this game having 45, but also golden bugs, Poe souls, and some other mini-games and side quests as well. In HD, there are stamps you can collect, but since Miiverse has been shut down, I don't really count them towards completion. Golden bugs are mainly found throughout Hyrule Field and can be turned into Agatha to get rupees in a bigger wallet. Poe souls, you'll be able to start collecting around the second half of the game for Giovanni, who's been cursed by them. And these are one of my least favorite collectibles in all of Zelda. They aren't required, and you can find about 30 of them pretty easily if you keep your eyes open. After you get 20 in HD, you get the new Poe lantern that'll shine if a Poe is in the area. But some of these I swear I needed a guide to find. Some are hidden in ways that just weren't intuitive enough for me to figure out. Even after getting all 60, the reward you get is unlimited silver rupees from Giovanni's cat. But at that point in the game, it's not really needed. What sucks even more is that they only come out at night, and one thing I've never understood is that you can't manipulate time between day and night. Every 3D Zelda game has always had a way to do this, but in Twilight Princess you just have to sit there and wait. Even in HD, they never added a way to fast forward or give you an item to make this easier. The best part is too, if you knock down a Poe and it happens to turn day and it disappears, you gotta wait nearly 17 minutes to get another attempt. If you're a completionist of any kind, I just recommend skipping this entirely because after a certain point, it's just not worth it. At least the minigames are pretty fun. Twilight Princess is kind of unique with its minigames. Most aren't too brain taxing and just require the use of a specific item, but one I found myself enjoying the most is fishing. I don't know why, honestly. Fishing is something in games I don't tend to do because in real life I really don't like it, but there's just something relaxing about it in Twilight Princess. Maybe it's the music or how you can go in a canoe to go around the fishing hole with different lures. It's similar to Final Fantasy 15 for me, it's just relaxing to do. The one minigame I've never understood though is sumo. It's only brought up very early in the game by Bo, the mayor of Ordon Village, and then you sumo against a Goron and that's it. It's a pretty cool minigame too, and one I wish that had more prevalence in Death Mountain because after you finish the second dungeon, you don't really ever have a reason to go back there. One of the new things that HD introduced was the Cave of Shadows. Similar to the Cave of Ordeals or the Savage Labyrinth in Wind Waker's case, the Cave of Shadows is a 40-floor gauntlet that you take on as Wolflink. It's not a bad idea in theory, as there are enemies here I've never thought to use Wolflink against, and having to plan around their attacks was pretty cool. However, what kills my enjoyment for this mode is how you have to go through it 3 times to even complete it. I didn't touch this place until after I had all 20 hearts and had beaten the game, and after the 6th floor it says I have to get stronger. Okay, I come back in again, I'm able to get past floor 6, and then I get halfway to floor 20 and it says the same message. The cherry on top is that when the game forces you to leave, you have to start all the way back at floor 1 and make your way through the whole thing again with very, and I mean very, limited healing. I really wanted to quit after that second time because at that point I had nearly spent 30-ish minutes going around this place, and then to do it all over again and then to keep going afterwards drained me. Even then I almost bit it on the last floor, and if it wasn't for the Zelda amiibo that replenishes your hearts, I wouldn't have been able to complete it. The reward was just a bigger wallet to hold up to 9,999 rupees and a photo op with this cool statue based on the amiibo that you have to use to even unlock this mode to begin with. If it wasn't for my sheer curiosity, I wouldn't have even touched this place, and now that I've completed it, I never want to do it again. I believe if you complete it, you can then save the data to the amiibo to bring in a stronger Wolflink in Breath of the Wild. But guess what? Because I was mashing the A button, it acted like I didn't want to save, and now I don't have a maxed out save on this thing. It sucks, but I really don't want to go back to this place. I think there's some potential with this idea, but it just needed to be reworked a bit more. I like how it looks. It's got some cool wolf statues scattered throughout. It really brings out the whole wolf thing this place is going for. Twilight Princess in general has a pretty interesting art style. After the release of Wind Waker, it seemed Nintendo really wanted to appeal to the Western market of Zelda fans since Wind Waker was polarizing due to its cartoonish look and art style. If you look at some of the beta images for Twilight Princess, you can see that Nintendo was clearly drawing inspiration from Lord of the Rings to really appeal to fans that grew up with Ocarina of Time. Even the artwork was going for more of a dark fantasy setting, making it feel like a much more mature Zelda. Lots of dark lighting and ghoulish looking enemies to really help create the sense of dread, similar to something like maybe Berserk. Like, look at the hero shade. He looks like Skull Knight from that series. I think Zelda could potentially work with this art style, and honestly, I'd love to see Zelda try this type of dark fantasy look again at some point in the future. Nowadays, the only thing I can think of that's similar is something like Dark Souls or Shadow of the Colossus. Unfortunately, because this game was released back on the GameCube and Wii, certain things haven't aged well graphically. Hyrule Field has very sharp drop-offs and some weird textures, and some of the animals look like they're updated N64 models. It's not all terrible, but they really could have turned down the bloom a bit in certain areas. The original game had this filter over it that felt like it smeared some of the colors a bit, but in HD they fixed this for the most part, but there are still scenes that look really weird because of the coloring. This is mainly an issue in the Twilight areas. It's like, look at Zelda here, it looks like she's part lamp. It's not a major issue by any means, as it happens very few times throughout the whole game. On the music side of things, Twilight Princess is pretty high up there as one of my favorite Zelda soundtracks. It doesn't beat Wind Waker for me personally, but it comes pretty close at points. I think the best way to describe the OST in general is adventurous. One of my favorite examples is when starting up the game and hearing that music build up as Link rides across Hyrule, ending with the logo appearing at the climax. It sets the mood perfectly for the big adventure you're about to go on. Town themes sound great and bring them to life, as small as some of them are. I didn't grow up with Ocarina of Time in the same way as Twilight Princess, but stepping out into Hyrule Field for the first time and hearing the theme that played made me so excited for the grand adventure ahead, and I'd imagine it was like that for people back in 1998 as well. I don't think I would put the soundtrack as a whole in my all-time favorites, but each track serves its purpose well enough. However, just like Twilight Princess, I feel I really need to mention Zerio, or Zelda Reorchestrated. If you've ever looked up Zelda remixes, you might have come across these guys, as they're mostly known for their Zelda remixes. But one of the most interesting things that they did was actually make an entire album dedicated to Twilight Princess. They were even able to ship a very limited amount of, I believe, 1,500 copies physically, and that's it. I was extremely fortunate to actually manage to snag one of these, and boy are these remixes in a league of their own. Before, I described the soundtrack as adventurous, but this just takes it to another level. I've been to the Zelda Live Orchestra one time, and that left me speechless, and the same can definitely be said here. It's something that's left its impression on me almost as much as the game did, but just like the manga, it's an outside factor that adds enjoyment to something I already love. So after all that, I can still say I love the game, and I can easily recommend it as a starting point for anyone wanting to get into the franchise. Throughout a lot of this video, I've shown a lot of my collection that I've built around this game, but I still haven't answered the question as to why it was my favorite game of all time. I've been playing this game for almost 15 years, and I've beaten it at least 40 times. And believe it or not, it's not my most beaten Zelda. That goes to Ocarina of Time. I don't want to say it's just because of nostalgia's sake or I couldn't think of a reason, because that feels a bit anticlimactic. I get that some people don't need to look that hard to find a thing as their favorite, and that's perfectly fine. I like to be able to explain it not just to a person, but also myself why something is my favorite. Taking a step back, I tried to really look deep in myself to see what else did this game do. Twilight Princess was one of the first games I ever hyped myself up for. It easily delivered on the expectations I set for it and left its mark on my history of playing video games. It was after thinking of that I began to understand. You know when you get into something, it just clicks, even if it's something you've never experienced before. Before Twilight Princess, I had never been exposed to something like it. The feeling of adventure in a big world. Growing up, I mainly stuck to things like Pokemon, Jak and Daxter, and most of the Mario spin-offs, so my exposure to open world games was pretty limited. You could make the argument that games like Jak and Daxter or Pokemon is all about that, but not in the same way Zelda is. Most of the open world games I enjoy need to have some kind of hook to pull me in. Just giving me an open world with nothing else to do doesn't do it for me. Most of the time it's the gameplay or story that pulls me in the most. Twilight Princess's story may not be as deep as other video games I've played, but if there's one thing it does well is having standout moments that stick with you throughout it. Seeing Link defeat King Bulbin on the Bridge of Eldin the first time was so cool to me as a teen, or when Ganondorf and Link prepare to face off, there's this sense of cinematic storytelling that pulls me into these moments, as well as having the world itself contribute to the story and its place within the Zelda timeline. Areas show how they've evolved from when they first appeared in the series and how the passing of time has affected them. It was because of Twilight Princess that my tastes evolved into me trying out games like Okami, Final Fantasy, and Xenoblade. It's thanks to this I think I can finally answer after nearly 15 years why it was my favorite. Twilight Princess was the game that shaped how I view open world games, and that sometimes they can lead to a bigger adventure with moments that pull you into the world and link you to it. And that's another video wrapped up. This video in particular was probably one of the hardest ones I've ever had to make, and mostly because I've had a lot of stuff just popping up IRL that made it really hard to work on. But I want to thank you guys so much for your patience and making it through this video. These videos I never meant to make this long, but when I'm interested in something, I want to talk about it. So I don't know, maybe the next video will be longer. Who knows at this point? Also, a huge thank you to Toukitsune. I had commissioned them before for the Yakuza video, and I wanted to commission them again because their work is just absolutely incredible. I will leave their info in the description. Please check them out. They totally deserve it, and I just can't recommend working with them enough. So with all that out of the way, I'll be taking just a small break in between the next video project, but it won't be long before I'm back with you guys here again talking about a game that I bought with, so until next time.